What's going on, everyone? So welcome to the latest video in a series of reviews where I focus on Academy Award Best Picture winners and rank them per decade. I've obviously done 20s, 30s, you get the idea. You clicked on this video, you know it though. I'm focusing on 2000s Academy Award Best Picture winners ranked from worst to best. This time though, I am joined by Sergey of SkynetGen, that is a YouTube channel. Actually, ironically enough, he was one of my first subscribers on this channel, so huge shout out to you, and I'm glad that we were able to collaborate on this video. Now, for those of you that are new to my collaborations, I haven't done too many, but I'm going to have Sergey give his number 10 to 6, because obviously there was 10 Best Picture winners. For this decade, he'll do 10 to 6, then I'll do my 10 to 6, then he'll do his 5 to 1, and then I'll do my 5 to 1, and then we'll recap. So, all that exposition aside, let's get started. Kick it off for us, Sergey, now.
How's it going, everyone? Chad, I want to thank you for having me on this channel to do this top 10 Best Picture winners of the 2000s. You've done an incredible job up until this point, and I want to thank you for including me in this series of Best Picture winners. The 2000s was a pretty good year. I'd say the films were very good, though I do feel some films were snubbed and weren't even nominated in certain years. But in all, a very solid decade for films, and with that I want to start with my number 10 pick, and it might be an obvious pick, and that's Crash. By all means, not a terrible film. I think a lot of people grow to hate the film, and look, it's not a perfect film. It's got its problems. I think its characters are easily the weakest thing. As it's a story, it focuses more so on its message, and its message is a little jumbled because there's just a lot on its plate. It's trying to address a vast group of minorities in one film, and it's trying to appeal to a vast audience. It's almost like what Lost did with its characters, very diverse cast. We're trying to get each person to identify with a certain character. It's a little too obvious. It just gets kind of in the way with what the message is of the film, because if they could have taken one group of minorities, focused on just them, and made a much more powerful film about race and racism that exists in the country, which is still clearly an issue. If you turn on the news, what's happening in Minnesota right now, still a very big problem that we face, and they could have just focused on one group of minorities instead of trying to address everybody, and it just feels like a very messy film. At times it gets a little preachy with its themes and its score. There were certain characters that did move me a little bit, and there was Michael Peña's character, the Middle Eastern guy you really felt for, but they devote such little time on characters like them, and the message is somewhere there. It's a movie that has a lot of heart, but not a Best Picture winner. At number 9, it's gonna be Slumdog Millionaire. It's, again, another film that has a good message. It's a very hopeful film. Definitely one of the lighter films amongst all the nominees. And I could see why people got behind it. There's a lot to like in the film. I like its structure. I think the suspense, it keeps it up very well. The beginning is very raw and gritty. You really feel for these children. And I like the message of hope. It has a really nice message for people to be hopeful that you can come from nothing and still end up somewhere. I really like that. But again, not a perfect film. I think as the time progresses, as we're following these kids as they're growing up, they kind of gloss over a lot of harsh realities, and a lot of it is unrealistic. Now, I understand it's trying to be hopeful, and that's the whole point of it, that you're just lucky that this, just by luck, this happens to this character, for example. But I just wasn't buying it too much. I thought it was a lot of eye rolling for me. I was like, this would never happen, and if this were to happen, it would be a lot more severe than what you're showing us, actually. Also, I didn't think the acting was particularly great. I thought the beginning, the children were great, and then as the film progressed, these actors, I was not sold on their performances. The story was entertaining enough, but for me, this was a maybe one-time watch. I wasn't really blown away by the film. There were things I enjoyed. The editing is good. The cinematography is all great. It's a good movie. There's a big gap between Crash and this film, but you know, this film has got to go somewhere on the top 10 list, and it was one of the weaker ones. At number 8 is A Beautiful Mind, directed by Ron Howard. This is easily one of his best films he's done. I still do prefer Apollo 13 more so than this film. Russell Crowe easily gives one of his best performances of his career in this film. I really love the score. It's very moving. Why this film is a little lower on my list is mainly because it's very one-sided. I get pretty picky when it comes to biopics. I'm not a huge fan of them because I'd rather just watch the documentaries more so often than turn to a biopic. It's one thing watching a war movie that's not accurate, but when watching a biopic that wants to embellish a lot and focus on one thing more so than another, it kind of bothers me a little bit, and that's why this one's a little bit lower for me. Without giving too much away, this is a little hard to talk about this film, but it focuses more so on his health than anything else, and it's almost as if everything we should know about John Nash is about his health problems rather than his accomplishments. And one can say that, well, his accomplishments are kind of difficult to talk about. You know, it's game theory. It's not a topic that everyone's going to understand. Well, the same can be said about movies like The Big Short and Vice. Very difficult topics that are addressed in a way that everyone can understand. We could have learned more about John Nash other than his health. I understand it was a big part of his life. It was really getting in the way of his true genius. I don't think all we want to remember a person is for their health rather than their accomplishments. I feel like the film barely addresses it, and we get like a sliver of information towards the end of the film, and it kind of does a disservice to the actual, you know, person that whose life the film is trying to cover. I think the first half of the film is really good, very good. The second half of the film kind of goes on a weird direction. I thought it was probably where the film started losing it for me. You know, it's a good film, I just didn't see it as a Best Picture winner. Maybe for that year, maybe it was, but not a Best Picture winner, probably. At number 7 is going to be a very unpopular opinion because this is a film that a lot of people are going to have easily in their top 5, maybe even their top 3, and that is The Departed. I don't know what it is about this film, but honestly, I'm not a fan of crime drama films. I just couldn't get behind a lot of the characters. I can appreciate the film for a lot of things. It's acting, the story is well told. The story is interesting enough, but as a Best Picture winner for me, this was kind of a shocker. There were better films that year, and it's a little weird that this one won Best Picture. Scorsese has had so many other better films that hadn't won, whether it's Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, even Wolf of Wall Street, even Shutter Island. Like, you know, I like that movie more so than this film. I think Scorsese, again, continues to struggle writing female characters. There was nothing impressive about this film in terms of story. I wasn't blown away by it. I thought it was a good movie. I didn't think it was a great movie, but I do respect it for how well it's made. The cinematography is good, the editing is good, its pacing is pretty good. It does a good job giving us access to both sides of the story from both the good guys and the bad guys. The ending is probably where the film, I think, falls apart for me. I thought it was a real cop-out to just do what they did instead of wrapping it up properly. It's a very violent film, and I don't think the ending was called for. I think that's where it really killed it for me, as I was expecting a much better ending with the build-up that they were going for. But still, I respect the movie for a lot of the things that it did well. I think it's a good movie. I just think that it might be one of the most overrated films to win Best Picture, and there's a lot of hype around it, and I just think it's a good film. I don't think it's a great film. At number 6 is the 2003 Best Picture winner, Chicago. Of all the movies I own 2 musicals, and that is Sweeney Todd and Les Miserables. Those are the only 2 musicals that I have enjoyed. Probably because they're both dark. But I will say, Chicago was very enjoyable. It's very grand and epic. It's the costumes, the designs, The production, the performances, the music, it's all extraordinary. It's done really well. Catherine Zeta-Jones and Renee Zellweger give it their all in the film, and they are spectacular. It might have been better on Broadway, I will say that, because when it comes to transferring a kind of Broadway production to a film, there's not much substance. There isn't a whole lot of story there. The characters aren't a whole lot likable. Their character arcs are wrapped up way too quickly for you to believe. But aside from those problems, it's a very entertaining film. There's a lot of fun to have. The music really sticks with you. And I could see why this was the Best Picture winner that year. It's a big crowd pleaser. It's one of the most big, grand, epic musicals I've seen. Was it the best movie that year? Probably not. I'd definitely go with The Pianist. War films generally have a hard time winning Best Picture, and could have easily gone to that film.
All right, Sergey, I like your choices. Let's kick it off, guys. For me, my number 10 is Chicago. I thought this movie was solid the first time I saw it, but the second time I couldn't even get through it. I don't think it's a bad movie by any means. It's well put together for sure, but I think that overall the impact it had on society wasn't really impactful. And even years later, it's a movie that you watch and you're like, this is entertaining, I suppose, but you don't really leave the theater, or even if you're watching on a device, and say, wow, that was really something. You watch it and you say it's a beautiful style over substance movie, which it is. But that's really all I can give it. I think it's a movie that doesn't really stick for me, and I'm saying that as someone that does love musicals. But that was my number 10. My number 9 is the movie that many people hail as one of the worst movies of all time and worst Best Picture winners ever. I really disagree. My number 9 is Crash. I don't think this is a bad movie. I think it's a movie that has honorable intentions, and it starts off really strong, but it does kind of dwindle into preachiness, for sure. And I'm not going to say that preachiness isn't a bit much. It is. I think that the messages they're going for, it is very important. But it's kind of sloppy a little bit towards the end. But I do think it's backed up by great performances, some memorable moments. I mean, there are some moments in this movie you can't deny that are really impactful. Specifically one with Matt Dillon dealing with like a car wreck. That scene to me is really impactful, and I think that it is perfect with the music that's going for. Again, I don't think it should have won Best Picture by any means. Same with Chicago, but I think for what it is, it's solid. It's just so many people are blinded by the fact that Brokeback Mountain didn't win. And I'm saying that as someone that owns Brokeback Mountain. Yeah, I think it should have won, but here we are. Crash won, so that's my number 9. My number 8 is a movie that I loved. Seen it several times, I loved. But recently I saw it and I thought it was just solid. And my number 8 is Slumdog Millionaire. Yeah, I own it. I don't know if I'm going to sell it or not. I have this thing in my collection, like you guys have probably noticed if you watch my videos, that it's gotten bigger, but it's gotten bigger, but it's also gotten smaller because there's certain movies that I've like sold off and whatnot. I just have this thing in my collection where, you know, sometimes if a movie just hasn't really impacted me that much after many views, I end up selling it. Like I have a system. I'm not going to tell you guys my system, but I have a system. Maybe I'll tell you guys sometime, but not now. Because that's not the focus. Slumdog Millionaire is a movie that Sergey kind of touched upon this, and I do agree to an extent. It's a movie about chance. It's a movie about basically like kind of getting lucky in certain situations. And I get it. It's an underdog story. But I think the fact that the premise, it's executed with ease by Danny Boyle. Like I do think that his stylistic directing is interesting for sure. But I just can't help but say that I just felt overall like the romance and the overall story and plot points that are utilized, I just think that they're okay. And I really was not the biggest fan of the editing, honestly, this time around. And that's something I find interesting because I do appreciate different editing techniques, but I do think it was over-edited. I kind of wish, I love the Bourne trilogy, but I feel as though maybe they shouldn't have tried to be so much like that trilogy with Slumdog Millionaire, because I do feel like smooth camera work would have made something a lot more impactful. Although the editing in the final like 10 minutes I do think is good, but I just felt like overall the editing wasn't the best, which is ironic because it won Best Editing that year. But I think it's a solid movie. I think it's entertaining, but it just overall wasn't the best movie that year. And I think that in terms of Best Picture winners of the 2000s, it really does pale to many of them, except Crash in Chicago. But again, it's a solid movie. So, of course, that was my number 8. My number 7 is The Hurt Locker. The Hurt Locker is a movie that I know many people that like jerk this movie off and say it's one of the best movies ever. I like it. I do. Obviously, I own the Blu-ray. I think Catherine Bigelow's directing is really good. I do have to say, Slumdog Millionaire's editing hasn't aged well for me, but Hurt Locker's editing really aged well for me, especially as, again, I've said this in a couple of videos, but as someone that is in post-production for their movie, it is really inspirational to see that they had, I think it was like 200 hours of footage for this movie, and they were able to cut all that footage down into a 2-minute movie. And the editing, it's not choppy, it is fast, but I think it is very well edited, especially during the very tense scenes. Like, this is a movie that's basically, I believe it's like 7 bomb situations, and the movie's very simple. Like, it's literally about this guy going through those 7 bomb situations. And although, yes, it's not, you know, the most plausible movie, apparently, based on what a lot of people are saying in you know, obviously military and everything. I get that, and I definitely do criticize that a little bit, but I think overall, as an intense war thriller, it gets the job done. I do think it's a good movie. I have my issues with it. I do think Catherine Bigelow's other movie, Zero Dark 30, is incredible, but The Hurt Locker is still good, which is why it's, you know, more of like the middle of the pack, but it's still good. My number 6, currently I don't have, I mean, I have obviously for the ranking, but I don't hold the physical copy because I actually lent it to one of my friends. My number 6 is A Beautiful Mind. Listen, I thought I wasn't going to like this movie upon rewatch because it's been like 3 or 4 years. And, you know, I've always said in like reviews, actually I don't want to say always because I feel like maybe I haven't said it as much as like I think it, but A Beautiful Mind, when it came out, it was a movie that you watch and you don't really think it's going to have an impact, but then you watch every biopic after that movie and you're like, wow, it really did take a lot from A Beautiful Mind with its structure and everything. And I think the movie works because I personally went into the movie not really knowing that much. And it's a movie you really should go in knowing as little as possible because it's impacted the most. Is the movie 100% historically accurate? No, it's not. By no means is it. But the messages, the themes, the way it's acted, the directing, it just, everything works for the most part in the movie. And that's why I like it better than The Hurt Locker by a little bit. Like, I give them the same rating, but in terms of ranking, I think A Beautiful Mind impacted me a little bit more because the war genre, there are already movies that impacted me, you know, but I felt like with the topic of A Beautiful Mind, it's something that doesn't really get much focus on, at least 20 years ago it didn't. So I feel the impact for it. I think A Beautiful Mind is a well-made movie. By no means is it perfect, and I have heard people criticize it. I get it, but I still find myself being entertained by it at the same time taking stuff away from it. So that's always a positive. But yeah, that's my number 6. Now, Sergey, we'll kick it off with your number 5 to 1. So let's go ahead and give that.
At number 5 is The Hurt Locker. Pretty incredible that The Hurt Locker won Best Picture. That year, Avatar had Best Picture written all over it, and if it wasn't for Avatar, there was a whole bunch of nominees that year. I have never seen the Best Picture nominees list to be as long as it was that year. You had movies like Inglourious Basterds, District 9, Up. The nominees were just stacked that year, and Hurt Locker, it did not have a whole lot of support either. There was a lot of media backlash with its portrayal of the army. It only screened at like a couple of thousand theaters. I think it's a better film than Avatar, and it's pretty incredible that an $11 million budget film could win Best Picture over a $200 million film. I think the acting is very well. I think the editing is really well done. Cinematography is good. The sound design is really great. I mean, if you have a sound system set up, this is a perfect film to really be engulfed by all the explosions and everything that happens in this film. It's really top notch. Yeah, it's not really a realistic portrayal of how the army would react in certain situations. Jeremy Renner is kind of a badass and he's likable. Him not following protocol would have gotten him discharged right away. I don't think anyone would condone that kind of behavior, and I can look past that because everything else is done really well. I think the only other issue I really had with this film is maybe there's no one story. This film focuses on a lot of just collective missions that they go on to, so there's not an overall arching story, and that kind of just, the ending is not very satisfying because of that. But other than that, it's a very well-made film, well acted, and I highly recommend watching this because it is really well done. And number 4 is the grand and epic Gladiator. Really fun film. It's got a lot of entertainment value. The performances are excellent. It's shot very well. The direction is perfect. I think the effects hold up really well for a film that is 20 years old. The score is very fitting. You identify with the character and you can see why he wants to get revenge. It's a more shinier, polished version of Spartacus, and while I still do like Spartacus more, this is a much more better paced film and more up-to-date film that I can appreciate alongside it with that film, even though there's nothing really new in Gladiator that hasn't been done before. Amongst all the nominees, this was the clear pick for Best Picture, and I agree it should have won Best Picture. One other nitpick really is the score. I think was very fitting, but considering that the score is very similar to Pirates of the Caribbean, I found it distracting because I do watch Pirates of the Caribbean more so often than Gladiator, and whenever I'm watching this movie I just think, alright, where's Jack Sparrow at? It's just kind of distracting at this point. But otherwise, it's really great film that everyone needs to watch at least once. Number 3, we have No Country for Old Men. Javier Bardem was such a perfect villain for this movie. He is a true villain. You know, you watch some of these horror films in like Halloween, Friday the 13th, none of those villains shine a light to how terrifying Javier Bardem is in this role. Just his performance alone, very entertaining to watch. I found the story very engaging and suspenseful, and it's pretty insane that there is no score to this film. And it does a very unconventional turn halfway through the movie, and it does something that's usually films don't do. I thought it was very bold of them to do. You know, could have just blown up in their face and ruined the movie, but somehow just made the movie that much more interesting. Made me curious of where they were going to go now after they did this thing. It was like, wow, like it just came out of left field. Everything else this film does is really incredible, and it is a must-watch film for anybody who's into westerns or just thrillers in general. Like, number 2, $1 Million Baby. Easily one of Clint Eastwood's best directed films. Another film, much like No Country for Old Men, that has you believing that it's going in one direction and then turns the tables on you. This movie, I thought it was going to be like Rocky a little bit. It had a lot of balls to kind of do what it did. And it's a real gut-wrenching film that had me crying almost 3 times because it is so emotional. You really care for the characters a lot. The character development is so strong in this film. The writing is really great. You really have a soft spot for Hilary Swank and everything that she's going through and how despicable her family is. Almost a perfect film. My only nitpick with this film is Morgan Freeman's narration sometimes gets in the way. I find that he narrated a little bit more than he should have. Even if you're not a fan of boxing, this is not the movie you think it is. It's a sad movie, but it is a must-watch film. It's truly incredible filmmaking. And my number 1 pick is kind of the obvious pick, and that's Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. Talk about an epic film. When I was preparing for this, I could have just watched Return of the King. I went back and I rewatched all 3 Lord of the Rings films. And after I finished watching them, I wanted to go back and rewatch the whole series again. It was that freaking good. I was so invested in the characters. I love the villain. I love the characters in these movies. And just, if we're focusing in Return of the King itself, you know, I know when you're looking at Return of the King, it's hard to not focus on the first 2 films, but the 3rd film alone has some incredible battle scenes. It has some awesome effects. The characters' arcs are fully realized, and it feels like you are on a journey, on an adventure with these people throughout this entire story, and the way it wraps up is so satisfying. It is the epitome of what every fantasy movie wants to accomplish and be. And I think that even after, how many years has it been? 2003, it's been what, 17 years now? The effects still hold up really well. I think in a technical aspect, this film did everything right and it deserves those Oscars. It's kind of sad that some of these other films didn't win those Oscars, and I feel like sometimes this movie gets a little bit of hate because of that it kind of swept all the awards that year. I'm really glad that it was able to do it for the final film, and I can see why some people don't like it. I think the pacing for some people might not be to their liking, but for the people that are invested in the story and the characters, even what we get in terms of the theatrical editions isn't enough, and that's why we turn to the extended editions that are 4.5 hours long. And even then we want more. We want to be back in Middle Earth because the world is so well realized, the characters are so well written, the story is so interesting, the magic system works really well there. It's one of the best book adaptations put on screen. It's a story that you can easily come back to and enjoy every so often because it's very transportive.
Thank you very much, Sergey, for giving your number 5 to 1. Now it's my turn, obviously. My number 5 is The Departed. I own the triple pack, and I first saw this movie when I believe I was 17 years old. I saw this shortly after I saw Infernal Affairs, and I remember saying Infernal Affairs was far superior. I don't know if that's still the case because I've seen that movie only once. I've seen The Departed so many times. This is a movie that upon first watch I thought was just solid, but the more I watched it, the more it really marinated with me, and I found it to be a really effective genre blend of movies. There's something in this movie for everyone. You can watch this as a casual moviegoer, or you can watch just as like in a critical aspect. That's something that really is effective about this movie. Bringing both of those worlds together, it's incredible. It's paced and edited in such a rhythmic way that you can't help but forget how long the movie is. And I think for that alone is why it's worth watching. But more importantly, there is a lot this movie is trying to say, and I think for that, it's worth watching. I mean, I watched it this time and I was like, holy cow, like, yeah, this came out during the Bush administration. And I didn't think about that, and I was like, that's why they were doing certain of these things, or couldn't do certain of these things. And I was like, that's awesome. Like, you could almost argue it's a product of its time because of that, but that's what makes it so good. And I don't know if some people are going to be like, oh, that doesn't age well, but it's like, if you watch this and think about the history of when this movie came out, it's even more effective. And I love that this time around, just fully realizing that. But I loved it. That's why it's my number 5. My number 4, I'm not going to lie, my number 3 and 4, I go back and forth on the order, but I decided, I was like, yeah, screw it. My number 4 is Gladiator, which I've seen on DVD, Blu-ray, and of course 4K now a couple times. What can I say about Gladiator? I think it's a movie that really works because it's a simple premise. It drags you in because of the simple premise nature, but then it really honestly builds a very good foundation. Like, you really care about the lead character. You understand the motivations of other characters, even the bad guy. And I think that's really effective. I think a movie like this could have easily not done that, but it did it. And I think for that, it's well worth praising. Not just that, though. Again, much like The Departed, it somehow managed to blend mainstream filmmaking with like art house filmmaking. I'm not saying Gladiator is an art house movie, but there's definitely some scenes that like you wouldn't expect to see in like a blockbuster, but you do, and I think that's really cool. Again, I love Gladiator. I know some people that unfortunately don't, but it's definitely a movie that I love. One of my favorite Ridley Scott movies, and yeah, that's why it's my number 4. My number 3, though, is a movie I gave a little bit higher. And my number 3 is Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. I love Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. And if I'm being honest, at one point in time, it was my favorite movie of all time. I just kind of, over the last couple of years, realized that it wasn't my favorite movie. It's one of them for sure. But there's just things here and there that I wasn't the biggest fan of. But I still love the movie. Like, I think, again, similar to The Departed, it has incredible filmmaking on display. Peter Jackson clearly is giving it his all. There are some neat messages. I think overall it's a very emotional movie. So again, I love the movie. Just a couple things here and there that I was like, about. But overall, I still love that movie. I have much respect to it. I am so glad it won Best Picture. And yeah, it's my number 3. My number 2 is $1 Million Baby, which I absolutely love this movie. It's incredible, I think, for many different reasons. But first and foremost, I think that this is a character-driven movie that's fully fleshed out. I mean, there's not a single character where you don't understand their motivations. You get it. You get where every single character is coming from. And every character, you think that they're going to follow a certain archetype, but they subvert your expectations, especially going into the final act where your world literally goes upside down. It's incredible, that final act with what occurs, it's incredible, but I'm not going to lie, even if that final act didn't occur the way it did, I still probably would love this movie because it's very brisk in its pacing. It has incredible characters that you so care about them and understand them. And then the filmmaking is incredible. I love the dark cinematography in this movie. I love the simple but effective score. And just, again, all that goes in the final act. And in the final act, you are given a message and things to grapple with that you were not expecting going into this movie. I think it easily is one of the best final acts that occurs. It's such a surprise. I'm not spoiling it. Like, I like the Beautiful Minds twist for sure, but I think $1 Million Baby takes the cake in terms of Best Picture winners with a twist. It's truly something. I think that this movie, if you are down for a somber movie, highly recommend it. This is what filmmaking is all about. That's why it's my number 2. But I will say my number 1 does have a pretty good twist in it. My number 1 is No Country for Old Men. I love this movie. Obviously, it's my number 1, but you know, kind of like Gladiator and Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, I was going back and forth in terms of placements. It was just like No Country for Old Men and $1 Million Baby. I love these two movies. It's like trying to pick your favorite child. It's like, what do I do? No Country for Old Men's an incredible movie because, much the same way as $1 Million Baby, you are tasked with questions and morals that are very ambiguous, not just in life, but with what the movie's giving you. And I think that's really awesome. You know, there's a fine line between good and evil in a lot of movies, and this movie really blurs the line because you're following someone that steals money, but you care for him because of he not being in the best of situations, and more so when he's getting chased by a villain. But even the villain, he asks a lot of moral questions that you can't help but also kind of question. And this movie is also incredible in terms of filmmaking. Again, you have brilliant cinematography by Roger Deakins. There's no score, really. I think that there's like a couple minutes of a score, but it's like background noise. This is a movie that is so thrilling, so white-knuckling, and it's incredible given the fact that there's no score. I love film scores, truly I do. But I think with what No Country for Old Men did, with basically no score, that's incredible. And the other thing is, I think it's very well plotted. The story is also very breathable. You know, it's very effective with what it's going for. I know a lot of people that don't like the twist in the final act. I personally do, because similar to $1 Million Baby, it took me off guard. But as a 16, 17-year-old, I did not like the ending. But now, I think the ending is a cherry on top. I think it's incredible with what happens. Again, being vague with it, because I do think if you haven't seen it, probably should get on it. But, yeah, that's my number 1.
So that wraps up my top 10 Best Picture winners of the 2000s. And I want to thank you, Chad, for having me on this channel. This was a lot of fun. I hope we can continue doing more collaboration videos. And I will pass on the reins to you.
Thank you very much for being on my channel. You know, I love your content. Very excited to hopefully collaborate sometime soon. Again, guys, don't forget the subscription notification bell of his channel. You know, he has good content. He's been lately doing like Blu-ray unboxing and everything, which is pretty cool. So check out his channel down below. Again, guys, what's your ranking though of the 2000s Best Picture winners down below? Let me know down there. And as always, don't forget the subscription, notification bell, and I'll catch you guys later.